Hey there! My name is Tori Lupinek, and you are listening to The Unclassical Musician, the podcast empowering the new generation of classical musicians to take risks and live a fulfilling life. Each week, we dive in headfirst into a topic on the minds of young professional musicians and come out the other side with a new perspective on life as an artist. Welcome to the first official episode of The Unclassical Musician. Today I am so excited to get to talk to you about an often swept under the rug topic in the world of the performing arts. Something that many musicians experience at least once in their lives. And that is, drumroll please, burnout. Yep, hang on to your hats because we're starting with a heavy hitter, folks. Is it weird that I'm excited to talk about this phenomenon that plagues so many creatives? It is a bit of a downer, sure, but I'm excited to talk about it because I want to expose burnout for what it truly is. According to Psychology Today, burnout, or workaholism, is a state of emotional, mental, and often physical exhaustion brought on by prolonged or repeated stress. Though it's most often caused by problems at work, it can also appear in other areas of life, such as parenting, caretaking, or romantic relationships. You feel me? What causes burnout? The cynicism, depression, and lethargy that are characteristic of burnout most often occur when a person is not in control of how a job is carried out, at work or at home, or is asked to complete tasks that conflict with their sense of self. Oh boy, I feel called out. If you are one of the lucky few adults who has not experienced burnout to some extent, or maybe you've been experiencing these symptoms and have not been able to identify what's exactly going on, here's how you know if you're burnt out. Physical and mental exhaustion, a sense of dread about work, frequent feelings of cynicism, anger, or irritability, dwindling compassion toward those in your care, and feeling like you can no longer do your job effectively. Ugh. Just think for a moment about how much our identities as people are dependent on our work as musicians. What happens when the stress of music school compounds? What happens when you're apathetic toward teaching lessons or putting effort into rehearsal? What about when you have been constructive criticismed to the point where you've lost confidence in yourself as a performer? Honestly, when you take all of this into consideration, music school and the audition circuit are the icky, emotional swamp where burnout thrives. I think burnout nowadays actually has less of a stigma around it due to the emotional trials of living in a global pandemic. We are under so much more stress now than we were at this time last year, and it has been 8 months of sustained stress. It is completely understandable for anyone to have a difficult time dealing with everyday life, let alone everyday life as an artist. But this is actually a good thing. We are seeing more and more people being open and honest about their mental and emotional health in the virtual realm, which helps others to see and feel that they are not alone. We may not all be going through the exact same life events, feelings, or emotions, but I think we can all relate to the fundamental nature of those major life events, feelings, and emotions. The sad part of all this is that it took a global pandemic to get us to this point as a society. In the spirit of being open and honest, I would like to share with you my personal burnout story. I've been burned out twice, actually, but I'm going to save the second story for another episode. I do think there is a particular type of person who experiences burnout multiple times, and that kind of person is me. Admittedly, I have been called a slow learner, but I'm also very much a type A, competitive, goal-driven, aspirational personality who likes to help others at risk of neglecting myself. And I have a hard time slowing down to catch my breath. I know there are plenty of you out there that can relate. These are all pretty common traits for performers when you get to a certain level. It's not our fault that we're prone to burnout because, as Psychology Today said, burnout is often caused by events outside of our control. My first real burnout episode happened during the one and only semester of my artist diploma program. This is a juicy, dramatic story, y'all. Keep listening. See how many burnout red flags and symptoms you can notice along the way. Anyone want to keep a tally? Just kidding. Please don't keep a tally. Like many other performance majors, I went straight from high school to college to master's to artist diploma with no gap years. I think that might have been mistake number one. Not taking some time off to figure out who I am as a person outside of the world of academia. I went from one intensive program to the next for 6.5 years of my adult life. I always worked during school holidays or spent a good chunk of the summer at a festival. And then during my artist diploma, a degree when you're basically supposed to do nothing but practice and perform, I found myself very overwhelmed with non-performance obligations. I had a teaching assistantship which covered my tuition and paid me a stipend of a whopping $600-something a month. I was a teaching assistant for the Music Theory and Aural Skills program at the University of Illinois. So I was present for 8 a.m. lecture Monday and Wednesday and taught a discussion section on Friday. I also did all the grading for my section, tutored one night per week, had office hours, and made my own lesson plans. This was a lot of work, more than I had bargained for as a flute performance student. Don't get me wrong, I learned a lot, but I got tired of it pretty quick. My work obligations were cutting into my practice time. During this period, I was also the applied flute lesson teacher at Purdue University's main campus in West Lafayette, Indiana, which is a pretty nice little line on my resume, but I only did it for one semester, and here's why. It takes 1 hour and 40 minutes to drive to Purdue from Champaign, Illinois. So, 1 day per week, I drove 1 hour and 40 minutes to teach for 2 hours at a rate of $33 per hour, and then drive 1 hour and 40 minutes back in the dark, only to have to be at 8 a.m. lecture the next day. Just for some perspective, my lowest standardized rate for private lessons in the Houston area is $45 per hour, and that's teaching high schoolers. $33 at a huge university with a very large non-performance or non-music major music department is a little low. Also, during this one fateful fall semester, my grandmother, who I was very close with, became sick. So I would drive the 2.5 hours home to Chicago on the weekends to be with family. There was definitely an emotional toll being taken there too. obviously. And this was out of my control. My grandmother ended up passing away that December, towards the end of the semester, in an awful combination of the hardest 4 months of my adult life. During those 4 months, I was practicing an hour a day if I was lucky. I exercised 1 day a week if I was lucky. I gained 20 pounds because I was emotional eating. I was depressed and grieving the loss of my grandmother. Perhaps I was also subconsciously grieving the impending loss of my academic career. It was at that point that I decided I needed to finally take time for myself. So what did I do? Here's the juiciest bit. I dropped everything and moved to Alaska. Oh, I know. That's a turn you weren't expecting, right? On top of everything else that was going on during that semester, I was also trying to keep up my very long-distance relationship with my boyfriend at the time. We had been together for 4 years, and things were getting a little rocky. And since I decided to not go back to school, I figured I had absolutely nothing to lose by taking a bit of a gap and moving 3,400 miles up north in the middle of January when it's dark for 20 hours a day. Just to clarify, said boyfriend and I met when I was an undergrad and we were playing in the same training orchestra in Chicago. He's from the Chicago suburbs, not Alaska. Yes, he is a working musician and shall remain nameless in this episode. I do not for 1 second regret taking that risk to move to Fairbanks, Alaska. It was definitely a once-in-a-lifetime kind of deal. Cold is beautiful. I made wonderful friends who I still keep in touch with. I didn't play the flute for a solid month. I got a job at a small web design firm as an office manager, and the education I got there would prove to be invaluable in starting my career later on. I began a diet and exercise program and started to lose some of the weight I gained in the fall. When I did eventually start playing the flute again, I taught some master classes at the local high school and was hired as a ringer for their musical production that spring. But I was not inspired to practice. I started playing again because I didn't want the last 6.5 years of my life to be a waste. I started playing again because of that guilt. Sure, it was fun playing with other people and working with kids who have never left the state of Alaska, but I was still burnt out. And my relationship was not improving as a result of me being there. A couple months went by, and I decided to go home to Chicago for spring break. The first year of my life where I didn't have a school-mandated spring break. And after 3 months living 2,400 miles away from my family and friends, I realized I wasn't happy in Alaska either. Winter was becoming exhausting. Hello, seasonal affective disorder. And living in an unhappy relationship was definitely taking its toll as well. I was happier in Illinois for that week than I was in the whole 3 months I had spent in Alaska. It was during that week that a flute friend of mine called me on a whim asking if I wanted to move to Houston to take over his flute studio. And I said yes. I flew back to Alaska and told my boyfriend I was moving to Texas. After some long discussions, we agreed to end things. I took a few days to tearfully repack and ship all of my things to my parents' house and was back in Illinois by the end of March. I wasn't going to start teaching in Houston until school started in August, so I had some time to kill, living rent-free at my parents' house. By the way, let's all say a big thank you to supportive non-musician parents. I had saved up enough money to support myself with a move to Alaska and everything, but I really couldn't have done it without my parents. I am very privileged in that respect. During that weird post-breakup phase, my emotions teetered back and forth between relief at being out of the relationship and having an actual plan for my career, and resentment for spending 4.5 years of my life with someone who actually ended up cheating on me. Practicing came in fits and starts, but I was committed to my revenge bod. I lost all 20 pounds I had gained in the fall. Eventually, when I was feeling better about myself and living healthier on a very basic level as a human being, I started playing flute regularly again. But it took a while. Let's stop here for a moment and take a breather. Just for some perspective, it was almost exactly 1 year between the beginning of my burnout and when I started feeling like myself again. 1 whole year. That's half a master's degree. It's kind of a long time to not have your stuff together. How many times did I think, what if I don't want to play flute anymore? I don't know. That's how many times. And for a refresher, here's that definition of burnout again for you. A state of emotional, mental, and often physical exhaustion brought on by prolonged or repeated stress. Though it's most often caused by problems at work, it can also appear in other areas of life, such as parenting, caretaking, or romantic relationships. Burnout develops when a person is not in control of how a job is carried out at work or at home, or is asked to complete tasks that conflict with their sense of self. Have you been there? Feeling like your education or your employment is out of your control? Feeling apathetic toward the thing you once used to have so much passion for? Is that also the thing that stresses you out the most? It's okay if you've been there. You are not weak because you've worked yourself into a burnout. If anything, you were trying to be so strong and work through the pain, stress, and lack of sleep in order to be there for everyone else. You self-sacrificed because you thought it was a requirement in order to accomplish every item on your long to-do list. And you were strong enough to put on a happy face to hide the cognitive dissonance from everyone else. I'll tell you what. When I told my professors I was quitting my program, no one knew. No one had any idea of the hard time I was having. I had tried so hard and used up so much energy to maintain a professional facade in the workplace. Even the other grad students I worked with regularly were surprised and looked at me with a sense of pity when I mentioned nonchalantly that I wasn't coming back next semester. I remember the head of the music theory department apologizing that I struggled with the workload and asked me how the assistantship could improve for TAs in the future. That was nice, but I honestly think it was an it's not you, it's me type of situation. All these events just culminating at once. I would have been a great music theory TA if that was all I had to do. My flute professor took it a little personally, telling me that he felt as though he had failed me. But again, it wasn't his fault. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my boyfriend at the time's fault. Maybe it's society. It's society that tells us that in order to be successful, we have to make money. And in order to make money, you have to work every waking moment of the day and hustle and grind your way through life until there's no real life left in it. In order to get that job, you have to get into the best school, and you have to practice 10 hours a day in order to get in. It's the culture of music school. Once you're in, the expectation is that you are practicing every waking moment of the day when you aren't in class or rehearsal. Because if you're not practicing, someone else is. And you want to get your 10,000 hours in before you graduate and hit the job market with a fancy degree and no real life experience because all you did was practice. Multiply all of this times 100 if you're a person of color. It's no wonder burnout is happening to kids in their 20s who haven't even started their careers yet. Okay, rant over. But do you understand what I'm trying to say here? You are not alone in these feelings, especially if you are fresh out of music school and especially during a global pandemic. I bet if you asked around, you'd hear some disheartening stories of people currently coping with burnout, or of people who quit their instrument as a result of these awful feelings. But I also bet that you would hear lots of inspiring stories of other artists who beat burnout and went on to have successful careers in music in one capacity or another. Do you have an inspirational burnout story you'd like to share with us? Feel free to post about it on the Unclassical Musicians Facebook page, or leave it in a DM on my Instagram at Tori Lupinek Flutist, so I can post it on my feed. I hope that sharing these stories is both healing for the sharers and inspiring for the readers. Now that we have spent an episode talking about what causes burnout, next week we are going to talk about how to avoid burnout in the first place, and that is self-care. Yes, love me some self-care. If you are a workaholic, prone to burnout, or just want to learn more about how we can give ourselves permission to take care of ourselves first, you're going to want to tune in. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you get episode 2 downloaded to your device when it drops. If you want to make me feel some warm and fuzzies for spilling my guts on the airwaves and memorializing them in podcast form, please leave a nice review for me on Apple Podcasts. I really appreciate it. And if you know someone who is currently struggling with burnout, maybe send this episode their way. I hope it helps. In the meantime, I hope y'all have a great week and keep killing it out there. Talk soon.